Our last singer is Eowyn Randall, and I think her intro is best read. So she's worried that any attempt at wit on her part will only succeed in seeming like desperation. So here are the facts. She was born and raised in D.C., has been writing since before she knew the alphabet, which is very impressive. Is one of those people who doesn't like cilantro, identifies more readily with the label Hobbit than anything else, and if her first name isn't unusual enough, you should ask her about her middle name, which I will do later.
Hi. So I'm going to read the beginning of a short story called Notes in the Margins, and that's basically all there is to say about it. Gus Feldon was rereading Hidden Faces of the Stars on his morning commute when he found the first note in the margin. Pressed up against the wall of the train in his attempt not to touch the person in the seat next to him, Gus was already sweating through his shirt. The note was a spot of chaotic color on the monochromatic page, and the sight of it made Gus's skin prickle. Alexander, the countertenor protagonist, had just finished his aria a 16th of a beat early on opening night, the moment that haunts him for the rest of the novel. Someone had written, "Important thing isn't lack of mistakes, but ability to move past them," in blue ink next to the paragraph, where Alexander stands in the wings trying to catch his breath and stop his heart from pounding. Gus stared at the cramped print on page 27 while the train pulled into and then out of a stop, rocking his body with the train's movement out of habit. He owned this book. He hadn't written that. He didn't remember loaning the book to anyone, certainly not anyone who would write in someone else's book. The rather trite statement continued to sit calmly on the page as Gus traced the curve of the letters, trying to decide whether he recognized the handwriting. It definitely wasn't his. Eventually, Gus turned the page. The blue ink had bled through. It wasn't a traditional blue, a ballpoint pen, but something brighter, like a robin's egg blue. Gus thought that was what John would have called it, and he would know. There was a ghost of the words on the other side. He flipped through the pages quickly, enjoying the flip each one made as it slid out from under the pad of his thumb. No other splashes of erroneous blue caught his eye. He shrugged. One of the many gestures he performed over the course of a day for an audience whose non-existence he could never entirely convince himself of, and resumed reading. When the train arrived at Gus's stops, the only other marks he'd come across were passages he'd underlined or sketched an asterisk next to during previous reads. He'd flipped back to the unexplained note 4 times and read it again each time. Important thing isn't lack of mistakes, but ability to move past them. The train stopped with 3 jolting shutters, and the doors pulled themselves open with a wheeze. Gus shoved Hidden Faces of the Stars in his messenger bag and disembarked, feeling only mildly uneasy. Before Gus Feldon read 20 pages of Hidden Faces of the Stars on his commute home, he checked page 27. It still said, "Important thing isn't lack of mistakes, but ability to move past them," in cramped blue handwriting in the margin. It still seemed like an insipid thing to bother writing in a book that didn't belong to you. There was a Chinese takeout menu secured to Gus Feldon's fridge by a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower. His sister had given it to him after her family's last trip to Europe. When he reached for the trifold menu that evening, it wasn't there. Even though he'd been ordering from the same place for almost 3 years now, he still didn't have the number memorized, so he dug through the drawer by the phone, the one filled with old bills and scraps of paper covered in notes he'd made while the phone was pressed between his ear and shoulder, and takeout menus, lots of takeout menus. He turned up one for the Chinese place after displacing most of the drawer. When John had been living there, this drawer was much more organized and regularly cleaned out, but Gus was never sure when he'd need a piece of paper again. There was a bright blue star next to the listing for orange chicken. This sort of 5-pointed star rushed out in one continuous line that Gus had never mastered making himself. Underneath the star it said, 2 orders. Gus hated orange chicken. He hated its cloying taste, which sat around in your mouth long after you were done eating it. He hated that it claimed to be an entree while tasting like a dessert. It seemed wishy-washy, desperate for approval. Allowing himself just a moment for such foolishness, Gus compared the note to the handwriting he found in Hidden Faces of the Stars. He didn't go so far as to get the book from the living room. That would be absurd. He just stared at the curves of the S and the wild loop of the E, its tail veering up unexpectedly. The handwriting in his book was a lot neater than this. He remembered that. But maybe if whoever had written in his book had written carelessly and in haste, this is what it would look like. Gus tacked the menu to his fridge, placing the Eiffel Tower magnet in such a way that it completely covered the direction about how much orange chicken to order. then called and asked for his usual Szechuan pork. Settling onto his couch with hidden faces of the stars, he waited for his apartment buzzer. In the gutter of page 42, next to a sentence he'd underlined in pencil, a sentence that read, "The snow crunched arrhythmically under Alexander's gate and sparked in the glow from the streetlights, casting fractals into the 16th of a beat that was repeating in Alexander's mind." Someone had written, "Pathetic fallacy," in that same blue ink. Gus had no idea what that meant. He remembered underlining the sentence because he'd liked the idea of snow sparking, and he'd wanted to look up fractals. He had a notion of what they were, but it didn't seem to make sense within the context of the sentence. He'd never gotten around to it. He dog-eared the page, wondering how he'd missed this note when he flipped through earlier. Maybe the way the words were crammed into the gutter had hidden them. Turning back to page 27, he dog-eared that one, too. The buzzer buzzed. He set the book aside and trotted down the 3 flights of stairs to fetch his dinner. The next afternoon, in the waning hours of his workday, the hours Gus Felding never managed to be productive in, no matter how much coffee he drank, or water, or how many times he paced from his cubicle to the break room and back to boost his circulation, he Googled handwriting analysis. The first hit was a website telling him handwriting analysis was pseudoscience. Gus made a show of reading the 3 lines of quoted text under the URL so his invisible audience wouldn't think him completely naive, then clicked on the second site, which told him that the way his mysterious notemaker wrote his E's, all in one swift loop, was a marker of a confident personality who often acted without planning first, and that because the A was made in 2 separate strokes, one for the circle and one for the stem, this person didn't have trouble compartmentalizing. Gus realized after reading the 4th characteristic that matched up with some quirk of the handwriting in his book that he was trying to figure out whether they described John. He'd never seen John reading one of his books, and he didn't think, despite John's brash and somewhat careless nature, that he'd be so inconsiderate as to mark up a book that didn't belong to him. If John had read Hidden Faces of the Stars, Gus wished he would have mentioned it. Ever since Gus had first read it, ever since it had first overwhelmed him in the same kind of all-consuming and unexplainable way a particular cloud scudding across the sun could, hitting him in the chest and leaving him clenching and unclenching his fists to contain a surge of momentum he didn't know how to use, Gus had been looking for someone to share the novel with. Maybe whoever Gus shared it with would also feel shivers of longing just under his skin as he turned its pages and could explain to Gus why he did. The office was emptying around him. The glowing clock at the bottom corner of the screen told him it was almost 6. He bookmarked the page on handwriting analysis and shut down the computer.